Okay, so good morning, everybody. This is our 42nd session of Wandering Through the Big Book, December 26th, 2021. And we're calling this one Ignatius and St. Ignatius, and he sold himself short. And I'm actually going to go through, he sold himself short first, and I don't know, Dr. Bob's final letter, and then get to St. Ignatius, because I'm afraid I'll go on too long about it. So we're going to start the way we always start. I'm going to ring this gong, and we're going to read the opening words for these sessions. So if you know you're reading, you can unmute. Here we go with the gong. Did you notice it's a different gong?
Ooh.
Okay, opening words. Welcome to this session of Wandering Through the Big Book. This is not a meeting of the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. We have no group conscience, no seventh tradition, no requirement for membership. Everyone is welcome. Our primary purpose is taking an in-depth look at the book, Alcoholics Anonymous, in order to deepen and strengthen our own recovery, to try to help others to do the same, and try to become trusted servants of our fellowship. We are seeking conscious contact through trusting God, cleaning house, and helping others. And we're trying to improve that conscious contact by practicing steps 10, 11, and 12 every day, and applying the spiritual principles we are learning to the details of our ordinary day-to-day lives. We will begin this gathering with a moment of silence to reflect on why we are here. And now some readings from the Big Book. Anne Marie, if you do number 1.
Morning, everybody. Anne Marie, alcoholic. I earnestly advise every alcoholic to read this book through. And though perhaps you came to scoff, you will remain to pray. Page 0, right before page 1.
Christina, number 2. Thank you, Anne Marie.
Christina, an alcoholic, no attitude of holier than thou, no fees to pay, no axes to grind, no people to please, no lectures to be endured. These are the conditions we have found most effective, page 18. But be quick to see where religious people are right, page 87.
Okay, thank you, Christina. And Robin, number 3.
If you are
as seriously, go ahead. Was that Buck?
Oh. Robin?
I thought someone called out to you, Jack, like they had an issue.
Oh.
I thought I was number 3, sorry.
Do you want to be?
No, go ahead.
Now we all want to be number 1.
If you are as seriously alcoholic as we were, we believe you have but 2 alternatives. One is to go on to the bitter end, blotting out of your consciousness how miserable you really are, page 25, and the other to ask our Creator each morning in meditation to show us the way of patience, tolerance, kindness, and love, page 83.
Thank you, Robin. And now Buck, number 4.
Number 4, every day is a day when we must carry the vision of God's will for us into all of our activities. How can I best serve thee? Thy will, not mine, be done. These are the thoughts which must go with us constantly. This is the proper use of the will, page 85.
And Jason, number 5.
Good morning. I'm Jason. I'm an alcoholic. Just to the extent that I humbly rely on God and do as I think God would have me do, will I be enabled to experience spiritual serenity right in the midst of the human calamity, page 68. Head in the clouds and feet firmly on the ground, page 130.
Okay, thank you, everybody. And now we will start our short lecture to be endured. Let's see, yes. So this is our 3rd session on step 5. The first session we read the book and talked about what it said. Second session we talked about phases of sponsorship and about St. Ignatius and some other stuff. So this third one, I'm trying to finish up on St. Ignatius, look at the story called He Sold Himself Short, and read through Dr. Bob's final talk. And but I'm going to put Ignatius last because I'm afraid I'll go overboard. So we're going to start with He Sold Himself Short. So if you want to follow along, it's in the study guide for step 5. It's where are you? It's on pages 6 and 7 and 8 of the study guide for step 5, but it's also in the, if you want to see it in the book, it's 261, page 261 in the big book. And we're starting in the middle of the story. It's not the very beginning, kind of starting in the middle. And of course, you'll get this from looking at it, but it starts, this is happening in probably, well, it's happening before they wrote the book, and it's happening, it must be 36 or 37, something like that. So here we go. I can still remember very distinctly getting into Akron at 11 p.m. and routing the same Howard out of bed to do something about me. So he's met this guy before. He spent 2 hours with me that night. So he's spending from 11 o'clock at night to 1 o'clock in the morning, telling me his story, which, you know, that's how we're trained. We're trained to stick to the truth of our own experience. He said he had finally learned that drinking was a fatal illness. Isn't that interesting? It's like, you know, we don't get that right away. Most of us are trying to learn how to drink normally. Fatal illness made up of an allergy plus an obsession. And once the drinking had passed from habit to obsession, we're completely hopeless. You know, again, it takes a while to fully accept that hopelessness, that my mind keeps telling me to do something that my body can't afford that my mind do, which is take the first drink because it's gonna kick off the phenomenon of craving, and I'm gonna drink more than I wanna, and I'm gonna wind up hungover or doing something stupid, or, you know, and who knows what that's gonna be. And if that's the situation, we're gonna have an awful rest of our lives. He laid great stress on the progression of his attitude toward life and people, and most of his attitudes had been very similar to mine. You know, I keep going back to page 72, which is the beginning of Into Action and the beginning of step 5. And it says we are trying to get a new attitude. We're trying to get a new relationship with our Creator, and we're trying to figure out what's in the way of that. It's all these different, we're trying to get a new fundamental attitude, which you could say is not an agnostic attitude. It's an attitude that says, be still and know this God thing is for real. It's not a joke, it's not a fantasy, and it can make a huge difference in your life. And the attitude we're after is honest, open, and willing to do stuff that our human selves do not want to do. So at any rate, so he laid great stress on the progression of his attitude toward life and people, and most of his attitudes were similar to mine. I thought at times that he was telling my story. This is what people, newcomers to AA, are blown away by. It may not happen at the first couple of meetings, but sooner or later, they hear somebody describe their inner attitude toward their lives, and they get to experience the wonder of identification instead of comparing ourselves with another. let's see. Oh, and I love how he ends that paragraph where I'm beginning to get a little balmy, withdrawing more and more, and I just want to be alone with my bottle. You know, how many of us go to that? I'll just withdraw from the world, me and my bottle, and I'll be okay. Here was a man with essentially the same outlook, except he had done something about it. The thrill. I mean, I felt that the first day. Wow. You know, I think he says later on, I realized that I began to hope for the first time. I mean, this is important. And what I heard in these, I was telling people earlier, we've had in our little home group, we've had these 2 gratitude meetings, and that's what you hear, is that grateful for feeling hope, you know, instead of desperation or whatever it is. Okay, next afternoon and evening, 2 other men visited me. They each tell him their stories and things they were trying to do, and they had a certain something, seemed to glow, a peace, a serenity combined with happiness. And I'm going to say again that that I'm convinced, for me anyway, that peace and serenity and joy and certainty of purpose, they're not goals. I mean, they are, but they're not goals that we accomplish. They are indicators of to what degree am I living a life based on belief in higher power and based on the truth that I can do that statement that we read earlier, that just to the extent that I rely on higher power and behave as I think higher power wants me to behave, I will experience serenity right in the face of calamity, which also means the reverse. If I'm experiencing restless, irritable, and discontent, it's telling me I'm not doing something. I'm either not relying on higher power, or I'm not doing, I'm not behaving as higher power wants me to behave. Okay, let's see, I'm over on to page 262. And so for 2 or 3 days, these people are interacting with him and encouraging him and trying to tell him how they're living this program and the fun that they have doing that. And then look at this, then and only then, after a thorough indoctrination by 8 or 9 individuals, was I allowed to attend my first meeting. Can you imagine? You got an open meeting going on and somebody shows up and says, well, I'm new. And you say, oh, well, you can't come tonight. You got to go through this 3-day indoctrination by 8 or 9 people before we're going to let you in. You know, these were closed meetings. They hadn't even made open meetings yet. And they are trying, they didn't want you coming into a meeting till you were essentially through step 3. You know, that you decided to give this thing a go. They weren't going to try to sell you on this thing working. They wanted to feel you really wanted to make the effort. How different it is today. How different. Just the distinction between open and closed meetings. Okay. This first meeting was held in the living room of a home and was led by Bill D. Well, that's AA number 3. And we'll get to him when we get to step 12. And he's the first, he's AA number 3. Meeting consisted of 8 or 9 alcoholics, 7 or 8 wives. Different from the meetings now held, there is no big book, no literature. Program carried on entirely by word of mouth. Meeting lasted an hour, closed with the Lord's Prayer, and then coffee and donuts. We did, most groups do the coffee and donuts at the beginning. Whatever, but it's just interesting. I was terribly impressed by this meeting and the quality of happiness these men displayed. So he stays in Akron 2 or 3 weeks. He's from Chicago, I think, but oh yeah. So the day I'm at the bottom of 262, day before I was due to go back to Chicago, it was Dr. Bob's afternoon off. You know, can you imagine you're a doctor with a busy medical practice, you're trying to be part of this fellowship. So what do you do on your afternoon off? You know, Dr. Bob takes this guy through the steps, and he takes the guy through the steps in that 3 or 4 hours, formally going through the 6-step program as it was at that time. This is the Oxford groups. There is no AA yet. There are no 12 steps yet. You know, and the funny thing when you get into the writing of the book is he didn't write the 12 steps till the very end. You know, wrote the whole book except for chapters 5 and 6 and writes them at the end. And he really does it in an altered state. He's you know, these 2 prayers, the 3rd step prayer and the 7th step prayer, they are profound spiritual invitations and decisions and all kinds of stuff. And I've never found them in any other spiritual tradition. And I don't think Bill was freewheeling. I think he was getting divine inspiration, and it comes through those prayers. At any rate, so formally going through the 6-step program, 1, complete deflation of the human ego personality. You know, getting somebody down to the failure of my self-reliance. Says it before the 3rd step. The first requirement of making a 3rd step decision is that I acknowledge that my life lived on my self-will has not worked. That's step 1. But they're saying it more directly, that the failure of my self-reliance, which you find out later is the cause of fear. And fear is the indicator of the spiritual malady, because I've got no relationship with God. I can only believe my own thinking. That's all I got. And for me, it's worse because I kept trying to prove my own thinking was right, because that's part of my problem. Trying to prove I don't need God. I don't even want God. Nobody's telling me what to do. Complete deflation of the human ego personality. And look at this. Step 2, dependence and guidance from a higher power. I mean, that's our step 11. They're putting 2 at the beginning. You know, they're putting 2 before they do the moral inventory and the confession and the restitution. I find that fascinating. And I love when you hear stories of somebody talking about his interaction with his sponsor, and his sponsor gets him praying day 2. Gets him praying day 2, incorporating prayer into this thing right from the beginning. Then you go on to the moral inventory and the confession and the restitution, and finally continued work with other alcoholics. It all comes from the Oxford groups. Bill said he had a problem acknowledging Frank Buckman because Buckman had become controversial. And Buckman was also, you know, we are poor by design. We're keeping money, property, and prestige out of the deal by design. So we wind up in grungy church basements, paying pennies for rent and trying to convince everybody to throw more than $1 into the basket. They were throwing $1 into the basket when it was $10, not when it was $1. Anyway, so Dr. Bob led to all these steps at the moral inventory. He brought up several of my bad personality traits, such as selfishness, conceit, jealousy, carelessness, intolerance, ill temper, sarcasm, resentments, We went over these at great length. Ouch. Ugh. And then he finally asked me if I wanted these defects of character removed. Well, what do you think? You want these things removed? And what do? When I said yes, we both knelt at his desk and prayed, each of us asking to have these defects taken away. It's just beautiful. Well, he says it. The picture is still vivid. If I live to be 100, it will always stand out in my mind. It was very impressive, and I wish that every AA could have the benefit of this type of sponsorship today. Dr. Bob always emphasized the religious angle very strongly, and I think it helped. I know it helped me. Dr. Bob then led me through the restitution step. Here's an afternoon, this guy's, what, 4 days, 5 days sober? I haven't counted it, but you know, he's 2 days before they let him go to a meeting, then he's hanging around the rest of the, what did it say, 2 weeks? I don't know, whatever. I mean, he's not, they do it right away. I think this is one of the real challenges of sponsorship, because I feel like if you don't help somebody get involved with prayer right early and going through what we do to handle resentment and fear and remorse, the big three, if you don't somehow at least talk through the process and the goal and what we're trying to we're trying to avoid retaliation and argument and seek a kindly and tolerant view. We're trying to avoid apologizing for God and letting God demonstrate through us what God can do. We're trying to avoid judging other people's conduct and instead ask God to mold our ideals and help us live up to them. Page 67, 68, and 69. You can show people this stuff, at least show them the solution we're holding out right away. Because otherwise what happens is the pressure builds up too much and they go and drink or do something else that doesn't work out. Okay, at any rate, do the restitution step, made a list of all persons I had harmed, worked out the ways and means of slowly making restitution. And that's the end that we're going to read about that, but we're going to pop right over to the Dr. Bob's farewell talk, which is on the next page. And you can find this in a number of places. You can Google it if you don't have the study guide in front of you, but this is quite a document. And he's 70, he's about to turn 71. This is July of 1950. He's going to die in November of 1950. And this is the first international convention, which they held, in, I'm pretty sure it's Cleveland, yeah. And the internationals happen every 5 years, and they're just different than the national convention. Okay, so I'll read it to you. So my good friends in AA and of AA. So can you imagine, he's been sick. I mean, he's going to say in this thing, he's been sick in bed, laying in bed 5 of the last 7 months. And here he is in this convention center looking out over all these people. I don't know why I'm getting emotional, apologize. I get a big thrill out of looking over a vast sea of faces like this and feeling that possibly some small thing I did a number of years ago played an infinitely small part. I mean, I don't know why he's infinitely small part in making this meeting possible. I also get quite a thrill when I think that we all had the same problem. Now, I'm going to say to you, I thought my problem was alcohol. I know today my problem is God. You know, it's not alcohol. Alcohol is how the problem with God shows up. My real problem is my agnosticism. And they keep saying over and over again, you're not going to overcome this disease based on human power. It's going to take something more. It's going to take understanding and power, mental understanding and behavioral power, physical power from this power greater than your mind and your body. We all had the same problem and we all did the same things and we all get the same results in proportion. Then he mentions 3 things. I don't see enthusiastic Amy on here, but you know, the second one is enthusiasm. Zeal, which I think means sincerity, earnestness. Zeal, enthusiasm, and stick-to-itiveness. You know, that's what we're looking for. That's what we need. If you will pardon the injection of a personal note, I've been in bed 5 of the last 7 months. My strength hasn't returned as I would like, so I'm going to be brief. And then he says a bunch of things. He says essentially 4 things. He's going to say, keep it simple, for crying out loud. It all boils down to love and service. Watch out for the way you talk. And finally, you got to give this thing back. You got to give this thing to another. So I'm going to read through it. 2 or 3 things flashed in my mind, which would be fitting to lay a little emphasis. One is simplicity. Don't louse it up with Freudian complexes, Jason. These things are interesting to the scientific mind, but they have very little to do with our actual AA work. You know, what's our actual AA work? Getting a new attitude, getting a relationship with God. And I'm blanking on the third one. And we do that by figuring out what's in the way of that. That's the way we accept spiritual help, by asking to have our obstacles removed. And we don't, when we get to 6 and 7, starting next week, we don't even have to decide what's good and what's bad. We really turn the whole thing on what's useful to you, God, my creator, and to my fellows. Interesting to have little to do with our actual AA work. The 12 steps, when simmered down, come down to love and service, period. An attitude of love that I believe is when I'm feeling love, gratitude, appreciation, that is conscious contact. I'm not creating that with my mind and my body. I'm receiving that from my spiritual creator. And then the job is to turn that into service. How can I best serve thee? That's what step 10 says. Thy will, not mine, be done. What can I do each day for the man who still suffers, the person who still suffers? All that stuff. It's all through what we're going to, you're going to see it as soon as we get to St. Ignatius. We understand what love is. We understand what service is. So keep these 2 things in mind. Ignatius is going to add a third, honor. That's everything from praise God to adore. I mean, there are all kinds of words that traditional churches use. Let us also remember to guard that erring member of the tongue, and if we must use it, let's use it with kindness, consideration, tolerance, patience, tolerance, kindness, and love, which is also all through St. Ignatius. And one more thing, he says. None of us would be here today if somebody hadn't taken time to explain things to us, to give us a little pat on the back, to take us to a meeting or 2, to do numerous little kind and thoughtful acts in our behalf. And then he warns us, so let us never get such a degree of smug complacency that we're not willing to extend or attempt to extend to our less fortunate brothers and sisters that help which has been so beneficial to us. Thank you very much. Blah, blah, blah. You know, we are so fortunate to have these two co-founders that were so entirely different. You know, the New York promoter, the New York competitive promoter, and Dr. Bob, you know, and what do people say? If it had been just Dr. Bob, it never would have gotten out of Akron. And if it had been just Bill, it probably wouldn't be around today. So, okay, so let's see. He dies 3.5 months later, and it's fun to it's really fun to go to Akron and see his house and see the little gatehouse at the Cyberling estate where Bill and Bob first met. It's anyway. All right, so now we're going on to St. Ignatius. So we're going backward, and it's in the study guide. And I was really hoping to, never mind, I won't. I was hoping to do more work on it, and I'm determined. I mean, I really would like to turn this into 4 pages instead of 1, but it didn't happen. So I'm looking at step 5, which is 10 pages, and it's page 5. And it says at the top, St. Ignatius Principle and Foundation. So he's born in 1491 and dies in 1556. So this is right about 500 years ago that he's writing up these things. You can find out about his history if you want. He was a military guy and had a conversion experience. And he writes this thing. I've got to have at least 6 translations of it. And I've got one that's called The 12 Steps in St. Ignatius's Spiritual Exercises. It was done in, I think, in Spanish. It could have been Latin. I don't know. But and translations are always so tricky. And it's true with this cloud of unknowing thing too. Anyway, these the spiritual exercises are they're now, when people translate them, they've given every paragraph, I guess I'd say, gets a number. So there are 370 sections, and we're going to read 3 of them, I think, but and in a large sense, it's divided up into a section he calls annotations, and then what he calls the first week, then what they call the second week, then the third week, and then the fourth week. And then the 6th big section is called Rules for Discernment. And finally, he has a 7th section about true attitudes for the church. So this is an interesting thing. I've had some exposure to Buddhism, and in Buddhism, they call the three jewels the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And the Buddha refers to the kind of like the role model. The Dharma is the truth, the teaching, and the Sangha is the community gathered around this teaching. So, and in Christianity, the Buddha would be Jesus, the Dharma would be the Bible, and the Sangha would be the church community. And you certainly can say in our work, I don't know that Bill and Bob are the heroes or the model, but I guess they are. And of course the book is our Bible, and our fellowship is the community. So it's just interesting how, and I think you could relate that to the 3 sides of the triangle if you wanted. So, so I'm just gonna tell you about these, a little bit more about each of these sections, and then just read you a couple of things. So, so he starts with these 20 annotations, and basically the 20 annotations are telling you to be patient, tolerant, kind, and loving, no matter what. It's really interesting. He was not a hard-ass sponsor at all. He was kind and soft and gentle, which is so different than the military training that he, that he would have come out of. And then he moves into, so these are all about attitudes, both of the giver and the receiver. So they would have a spiritual director, and then you would have it gets different words, sometimes retreatant, which means the person engaging in the retreat. And they basically, they're alone, and they're spending 4 to 5 hours a day in prayer during these retreats. And I haven't been to an AA retreat myself, but I have certainly heard from people that have, and I'm kind of starting to get on a kick of, wouldn't that be cool to, hold an AA retreat where you would somehow use the model of what he's doing but use our language and our stories and our thus and such. So we'll see. But at any rate, let's see, where did I have this? The first week has the primary purpose and the foundation. That's what I want to read to you. And the methodology of what they call the examine, which is taking inventory. That's all it is. The second week, they're talking about the kingdom of heaven, kind of like the goal. They also go through Jesus's, let's see, this is a better one. Yeah, okay. First week, they called it the purgative way, which means, kind of the emptying out way. Purification of the soul's intentions. That's an interesting idea. The turn away from human selfishness. This idea of loving, honoring, and serving God. A period of conversion from a life of sin to a life of following Christ. Which is similar to how can I best serve thee that we get in step 10. The second week progress from observance of commandments to a life of generous service. That's interesting. You're moving from this strict sort of focus on the commandments to a life of generous service, motivated by a love of God and the desire to follow God closely. The illuminative way, they called this. Week 3 was the mystical identification with Christ's suffering. So what they do is they use biblical passages and try to get you to enter into whatever it is that Jesus was going through. And then week 4, joyful communion with the risen Christ. So the week 4 would go through the resurrection. There are different terms that I don't fully understand yet, but and then there's a bunch of other information going along with all this. But I wanted to just read a couple of the sections before we finish up here. So this is the first annotation. Annotations to provide some explanation of the spiritual exercises which follow. They are intended to provide assistance both to the person giving the exercises and to the person who is to receive them. And then the first annotation. The term spiritual exercises denotes every way of examining one's conscience, of meditating, contemplating, of praying vocally and mentally, and other spiritual activities, as will be explained later. Just as strolling, walking, and running are exercises for the body, So spiritual exercises is the name given to every way of preparing and making ourselves ready to get rid of all disordered affections, so that once rid of them, we might seek and find the divine will in regard to the disposition of one's life for the salvation of the soul. So he gets heavy, and it's pretty stiff, but if you relate it to our stuff, these disordered affections, it means character defects. It just means the things that we are attracted to, or that we try to involve in our life, that are disordered in some way because they're not in accord with what he's calling the divine will. So I just wanted you to get a flavor of that. And then we get the first section of the first week. It'd be section 21 in the exercises. Spiritual exercises having as their purpose the overcoming of self. So it's just like, the first of those 6 steps that we talked through, complete deflation, that this is his way of saying the purpose of overcoming self, the human self, the ego personality, and ordering one's life on the basis of a decision made in freedom from any disordered attachment. This time it's translated as. So, I mean, it's complicated language, but the idea is I'm not power. We're trying to move from being powerless over our own character defects to being able to make good intentions, good decisions, free from our powerlessness over those character defects. So you could say our goal here is to identify our powerlessness over our own character defects, acknowledge that lack of power is our dilemma, and then go to higher power to get the power to overcome our character defects, which we pray for the removal of. Okay, one more, and this is the main one, and I'm okay time-wise. Principle and foundation. Number 23, if you want to go find it. And again, these will be all differently translated. This is just one translation. The human person is created to praise, reverence, and serve God, our Lord. Not Jesus, by the way, but God, our Lord. And by so doing, save his or her soul. And it is for the human person that the other things on the face of the earth are created, as helps the pursuit of this end. So there's a whole thing about finding God in all things, is the way they talk about it. And what he's saying here is, you are here to love, honor, and serve your Creator, and you're to use all of everything else in creation to help you do that. It follows from this that the person has to use these things, these other created things, insofar as they help toward this end, and to be free of them insofar as they stand in the way of it. And of course, later there's going to be this whole section for rules of discernment. How do I judge? How do I judge whether it's helpful or not helpful? And I'm going to say, well, I can judge by whether I can meet the calamity with serenity, or whether it just brings more restless, irritable, and discontent. To attain this, well, this is interesting, we need to make ourselves indifferent toward all created things, provided the matter is subject to our free choice, and there is no prohibition. And then he says this, thus, for our part, we should not want health more than sickness, wealth more than poverty, fame more than disgrace, and a long life more than a short life. Are you kidding me? You know, he's saying you shouldn't care. You shouldn't care whether you're healthy or sick, whether you're wealthy or poor, whether you're famous or just live in disgrace, or you have a long life or a short life. I'm still working on this. So with everything else, desiring and choosing only what conduces more to the end for which we are created. What I really love about this, and I know we've talked about this a lot, is the idea of primary purpose. You know, the idea that I am clear within myself what my primary purpose here on planet Earth is. And for years for me, in spite of, I would say, a relatively intelligent mind and a decent heart, and an interest in spiritual things, I was drinking daily, and I lived in fear of my reaction to the things in my life. And I really had no sense. My primary purpose was to survive and have a good time. Try to handle my own reactions to life and to have a good time. And I think my game plan was, if I've got enough money, enough toys, enough relationships, and enough alcohol, I can handle whatever the world throws at me. And I'm pleased to report that today, my sense of primary purpose is entirely different. And I feel so much better than I ever felt before. And this idea of love, honor, and serve, and for me, it all happens inside AA. I'm just right now really comfortable in AA, and so okay, that's enough. It's 9:20, and as always, I really appreciate you all being here. And I'm gonna gong the gong, and at some point during that, Buck's gonna shut the camera off, and we'll have a little open discussion. So Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Thank you for being here, and I will hope to see you next week.